Hello and welcome again to airgunweb.com. My name is Rick Utzler and I'm glad you can join us again. Before we jump into talking about our next review item today, I wanted to just take a quick minute and talk a little bit about safety. When I moved to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, the first thing I realized from talking to some various people is that the discharge of air guns is actually against the law here in the town. Well, I did a little checking, and actually general discharge of air guns is illegal. However, if you set up an adequate shooting range on your property, you can get a waiver from the police department and you can shoot on your property. So I went about trying to build a trap that would adequately keep all the pellets on my property and not have any ricochets and cause any damage. Now this is very different than where I used to live in South Carolina, because here I literally have houses within feet of my property line, while there I had acres and acres behind me, so it was much less of an issue there. Here it's a pretty serious thing. Most recently, over the Labor Day weekend, I went outside to around the side of my house and there was actually an arrow sticking in it. I came to find out that one of my neighbors had been shooting a bow and arrow in their backyard, and some friends they had actually missed pretty dramatically, and it had sailed about 75 yards and landed in the side of my house. Just a few feet to the left, it could have gone on the porch where my little girl plays. So obviously, safety is a big deal. What I want to show you today is just exactly how powerful some of these air guns are. When I constructed my trap, it was based out of this very thick plywood, steel plate, and then OSB behind it. And actually, after only a couple reviews, what I'd like to show you is that it has actually gone through the steel plate and come out the back side of this box. Now this was not terribly thick metal, but I thought it was going to be thick enough. Obviously I was wrong. To help prevent it going through the trap, which also has additional steel plating, I lined up these two pieces of OSB at an angle, and I thought that would stop it. Well, actually no, it didn't. I actually have holes in these boards as well. So just because you think you've done all you can do, don't take that for granted. You really need to be extra careful with regards to these air guns. They can be very dangerous. Now fortunately, behind my trap I have a dirt bank, so I'm in pretty good shape here. But there are rocks there and you can still have ricochets, and these things can travel and cause damage, you know, a long ways off. And the last thing you want is some liability because you didn't take all the precautions you should have. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce this before we get started today, but I wanted to take a minute to show you just how important safety is when you're dealing with these high-powered air guns. As you can see on the table here, our next review product is the Crosman Titan GP break barrel rifle. Now I've taken the opportunity to move this rifle right to the top of my review list because I've had so many viewers asking about its quality and its shooting characteristics. I'm going to go ahead and break this out of the packaging, assemble the rifle, do some general sighting in, and then we'll take a real good close-up look at this rifle. The Crosman Titan GP seems to me to be a low-cost version of the Remington Trail. It's pretty short, it's about 2 inches shorter than the Remington Vantage, and it's very well suited for smaller shooters or young shooters. One of the major differences between the two rifles is this rifle does not have a shrouded barrel. That's a pretty significant difference, and it's probably one of the reasons that the cost is down below that $200 mark. The rifle does not have any open sights, so you will need to use a scope. The included scope with this rifle is a very simple 4x32 scope. I was not very pleased with the scope. It does work, but I think this gun deserves something better. Even a Leapers 3-9 would be great. I'm sure Crosman can provide, say, a center point 3-9 scope, which would be very well suited to this rifle. Included set of rings would work for just about any other scope you'd want to use, but you will need to be careful because they are very low, so therefore you pretty much need to stick to a 32mm objective. This rifle is an import for Crosman, and it has their standard trigger. The trigger is the biggest shortcoming in this rifle. If Crosman could do something to improve the second stage, they would have a real winner on their hands. As it sits now, it takes a lot of patience to get good groups out of this rifle. So now that we've had a chance to take a good look at this rifle, I'd like to talk about some of the marketing claims that are on the packaging. A lot of manufacturers are very good about putting very high numbers on their packaging, but not really delivering. I'd love to say that this rifle is different in that category, but what we found is frankly more of the same. This rifle also claims to be up to 70% quieter than other manufacturers' quote quiet rifles. But before we get started with that, let's take a look at some velocities. For this review, I used 3 different pellet types. The first was to get a baseline, and of course that's going to be the RWS Hobby Pellets. The second was our most accurate pellet, which turned out to be the Crosman Premiers. That was actually somewhat of a surprise. I would have expected maybe JSB or H&N to be more accurate, but the Crosman Premiers gave us our best groups. And then ultimately, just to see how it would do with ultralight pellets, we shot the Gammo Pba Raptor Pellets. Let's take a look at our standard pellet, and that is the RWS Hobby Pellet. We had a low velocity of 699 feet per second, a high of 719 feet per second, an average of 711 feet per second. The extreme spread was 19.88 feet per second, and the standard deviation was only 6.78 feet per second. Let's move on to the best pellet, which was the Crosman Premiers. We had a low of 653, a high of 672, an average of 663.47 feet per second, an extreme spread of 18.49 feet per second, and the standard deviation of only 5.19 feet per second. Now let's take a look at the Pba Raptor Pellets. They had a low velocity of 809 feet per second, a high velocity of 854 feet per second, an average of 832 feet per second, with an extreme spread of 45.42 feet per second, and the standard deviation of 13.60 feet per second. They're a generally very inconsistent pellet, and the accuracy certainly showed that inconsistency. I believe the best group I was able to get with the Pba Raptors were somewhere in the 4 to 5 inch range, and that's only at 20 yards. They're not a great pellet for this rifle. Now that we've got the velocities under our belt, let's take a look at some average noise levels. Now, I'm shooting somewhat in a hole here. I've got my house behind me. In front of me, there's a dirt bank that's probably 8 to 10 foot tall. So I'm really in a bowl here, which I think makes it a little bit louder than normal. But I tested several different rifles so that we could get an average between the various types of rifles to see where this actually fits in. Now, Crosman says that it's up to 70% quieter than the competition's quote quiet rifles. Well, let's just look at some standard noise levels so that we can get an idea of just some averages. Normal speech is 60 dB. A lawnmower is 100. A circular saw is 100 dB. So if you're looking at normal speech being 60 and a lawnmower or a circular saw being 100, you can have an idea of where these numbers really fall in. The Gammo Whisper, and I have the Gammo Whisper with the gas ram, came in at 96 dB. The Crosman NPSS, which is another gas ram gun, but it also has a shrouded barrel, which helps with the noise, that came in at 93 dB. The RWS 34P, which is just a standard spring 22 caliber rifle with no shroud and no special mechanics, came in at 96 dB. In fact, it was just as quiet as the Gammo Whisper. Now, the Crosman Titan came in at 98 dB. In fact, it was the loudest of all of our samples. Now, I think what happens with this gun is my equipment doesn't measure the length of the sound, it only measures how loud the sound gets. Because the gas ram's shot cycle is so short, I think it gives the impression that it's quieter than it actually is. When you take something like the 34P, which has a spring and it does have a little bit of buzz to it, the length of the shot cycle is longer and the sound lasts longer. It sounds louder, I think, because it's just a longer sound. The Titan is very, very quick, and it's over very quick, but in actuality it measured higher than all of our other test groups. Now that may be because I'm in the bowl here, or it just may be that the gun is louder than people think. But in any case, it's certainly not 70% quieter than the other rifles we've tested. It was actually the least quiet rifle we tested. Fortunately, even though it didn't meet our velocity desires, and it didn't really shoot as quiet as I'd hoped, it did shoot pretty accurately. At 20 yards, you can expect to get nickel-sized or quarter-sized groups using the Crosman Premiers in the cardboard box. Let's take a look at some of these shot groups. The Crosman Titan GP is a pretty interesting rifle. At only about $166 from Pyramid Air, it really does fit a need, and you can see that Crosman is trying to really cash in on their Nitro Piston technology. The rifle's about 2 inches shorter than, say, the Remington Vantage, and that makes it about perfect for younger shooters. It's easy to cock and it's lightweight, so it's fairly easy to handle for smaller shooters as well. I definitely see this rifle filling a need in the airgun industry. It does generate some decent shot groups, which makes it a rifle to consider. Some of the things that you're going to need to look out for in this rifle: first of all, the scope needs to be replaced. It's a very inexpensive 4x32 scope, and I could definitely see this rifle benefiting from, say, even a Leaper's 3 to 9x32, something that has a little bit of magnification to it. The trigger is their standard trigger, and it's absolutely awful. I could see shot groups dramatically improving if the trigger was better. So what's my final take on the Crosman Titan GP? I actually like this little rifle. Even though I'm critical of Crosman's trigger, and I'm definitely critical of their marketing materials, I think this rifle fits a very unique need in the airgun industry. It's relatively compact, it's easy to cock, and because the shooting cycle is so short and crisp, it gives the impression that it's very quiet. I was able to achieve 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch groups with relative ease at 20 yards. Given some practice and a better trigger, I can see that really improving. At only $166, including the scope, albeit not a great scope, it's definitely worth considering. We'll have to see how the Titan holds up over time. We've only put a few hundred rounds through this model, and really we'll know more once we get, say, 1,000 or 2,000 rounds through it. I want to thank the folks over at Pyramid Air for providing this product and all the supplies for our review. Next time you need your next air rifle or your next batch of supplies, please remember to go to www.pyramidair.com. They're a great bunch of guys to work with, and they'll definitely treat you right. My name is Rick Utzler with Airgun Web. Thanks again for watching.